You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mott,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Carol Goodman.
Flesh, Blood, Steel, the new book from David Allen Jones. 16-year-old Jake Harris wakes up after a horrific car accident to find 13 years have come and gone. He's 29 years old, a cyborg, and one of the world's most feared assassins. Horrified by the things he's done, things he can't remember, Jake vows never to kill again. Unfortunately, the company that owns Jake has other plans. They're not about to lose their top hitman to the errant memories of his teenage self. When Jake manages to escape them, they launch a worldwide manhunt that ranges from a near-future New York City to Paris. Desperate to remain himself, Jake joins a rebel faction dedicated to wresting control of the world's governments from the hands of militarized corporations. Using his enhanced body and perceptions, he is able to aid them in their fight. But Jake doesn't realize the rebels have their own plans for him, ones that involve unleashing his unique talents on their enemies. Faced with a dark past he can't recall and uncertain whom he should trust, Jake must come to terms with the sinister choices that molded him into the man he became. Question is, can he avoid doing it all again? Assassins aren't born, they're programmed. Flesh, Blood, Steel by David Allen Jones. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Carol Goodman on the show with me. Carol has a fantastic new book out called The Night Visitors. And, guys, when you're hearing this in late March, the weather is beginning to thaw a little bit, but I had the great pleasure of getting this book and reading it in the dark and cold and stormy winter days, which is one way that this book really should be enjoyed. Carol, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Hank. Welcome. I'm glad to be here.
Carol, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
So my first memory, I think, was in fourth grade, when my fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Dubinsky, assigned creative writing, and I started a crayon illustrated epic called The Adventures of the Magical Herd, and about a girl named Carol who goes to live with a wild herd of horses. No mention is ever made of Carol's human family. The escape that offered me was the moment I think I realized that this is what I wanted to do.
Nice. So after that, or when you did that, did the teacher kind of sit up and take notice that, Carol took this assignment and ran with it?
Well, she did, and she was very supportive, but she did also call my mother in to have a parent-teacher conference to explain. While she was very happy that I was enjoying the writing, I did have to do my other work as well.
Well, how's that worked out for you now? I mean, have you needed algebra?
Let's not give me any math quizzes, actually.
Yeah, I'm with you in that boat. What about your parents? Did they recognize this kind of storytelling gift or gene or whatever? Did they ever mention that to you?
Yeah, they were very supportive, as they were, great supportive parents. They did worry, I think, as I got older that, what was I going to do with this? And they didn't have any experience of knowing writers or knowing what to do. And this is some time ago. I'm a little older, so it wasn't quite the age where you went off and did an MFA. So they were very supportive, but they were also concerned that I also have like a day job.
Yeah. Well, I think that's solid advice all the way around. Yeah. And, but do you feel like that's changed any at all? the idea that, a writer, you're never going to make any money. You know, it's going to be kind of a pipe dream. Do you think it's easier for people to write and make a living now? Do you feel like that the society is more accepting? Do you feel like that attitude has changed at all?
Not that much. And as a parent, I also have to struggle with my daughter is a budding artist writer, and I am very supportive of her. I think the only thing that maybe has changed a little bit is that there is the MFA path that people can go on, that doesn't guarantee any, that you'll make a living as a writer, but it seems a little bit more, like an actual path. I think it's still really difficult, and for reasons, it might even be more difficult now to make a living as a writer than it was when I was in my 20s. So no, I think it's still a struggle, and it's hard if as a parent to know how to balance that. I do think the day job's not a bad idea, not just for the money, but for the other thing you do. Yeah.
Well, it's usually a really good place to listen in on dialogue and to steal stuff as well.
Yeah, I think if you can find a day job that both allows you to write and that nourishes your writing, and I think that's that's the struggle, is to find what that is, and it's not easy, but that should be the aim.
So you got into poetry in your teen years and won an award. What was the draw to poetry for you?
I guess I think it was a love of language, and it was exploring language. And I wrote very kind of melodramatic teenage angst poetry. So,
as one does.
As one does. I think when I looked in my journals at one point, later on, I found an image of the rain lashing the windows like a machete. It wasn't always that great poetry. But I think it was really a love of language, and poetry enabled me to explore that language.
It was very visceral. You can argue whether it was good or not, but you had an idea of emotion that you wanted to convey already.
It's probably a precursor to becoming a thriller writer.
Right.
Introducing the machete.
So where did your love of mystery and thrillers come from?
I think the mystery just inherent in the world. My mother actually was a big mystery reader, and she read all of Agatha Christie and was always reading mysteries. And it took me, I think, actually some while before that was I didn't set out thinking that would be my genre. But when I read mystery, some of my favorite books were mysteries, and I think I found it to be a way to really create a compelling plot. So I started moving into mystery in that sense, and I've moved back and forth a little bit in my career between mystery and other genres. And I would even say my mysteries aren't particularly maybe cookie cutter conventional mysteries, but then I don't think mysteries are these days. I think mysteries have really opened up into the field has really opened up into a lot of different kinds of writing.
Mystery and thriller have been kind of uber hot lately. But when you look back, mysteries and thrillers have always been really popular categories, genres. There's just something inherent in us as people that love to pick apart the unknown, and maybe it's that we want to live out scenarios without having to live them, to kind of look at the darker side of human nature from the safety of our reading chair or something. As you talk to readers and hear, feedback on stories and things like that, what do you think from them, that they're taking away from your writing?
Well, I think first of all, there's the being drawn into it. So when I hear good things, I hear that, it was really, this really took me away. I couldn't stop reading it. And then I think it's usually somebody having to deal with some kind of struggle, some kind of betrayal, or some difficult period in their life, and coming through it. So there's a sense of you are exposed to danger, and people will, and even good friends will say, like, I couldn't go to sleep, but you're exposed to danger, you have this fear, but you come through it on the other end, and spoiler alert, usually things end up pretty well for most people. Not everybody, perhaps, but it's coming through that. And a friend recently said to me that when she finished reading The Night Visitors, that she felt that after having gone through all this turmoil, that there was she was so happy that there was some hope at the end. Spoiler alert.
Well, and I think that's what we ultimately want from a mystery. We want to see that someone has gone through the darkness and prevailed. With rare exceptions. Sometimes you read that book that's a little unsettling at the end, and it leaves you with something to think about. But I think that's not always the reason we go to mysteries. We want to see people come out.
Yeah, come out the other side. Perhaps, not the same, and perhaps, damaged, and there's a price has been paid.
Exactly.
But we've made that journey into the dark. It's like going into the underworld, and like, Orpheus, we have come out.
Right. So what was the first novel that you wrote?
Well, it depends whether you want to say first published or first unpublished.
Well, so I take it you have a desk drawer novel or two?
Yeah, two, actually.
Yeah.
So I wrote two novels. The first one was
Rite of Passage.
A young adult fantasy novel, not very good. But I, when I look back on that, I knew when I finished that I could write a novel, whether it was any good or not. The second one was a mystery. The second one was a book called Safe Harbor that was a mystery, and I didn't get that published either. But it was moving more in the direction of where I would end up. And then the book that sold, that broke out for me, was Lake of Dead Languages. So that is a kind of a thriller mystery novel that I wrote in 1999 and was published in 2001. So that was my first published book.
So that first desk drawer novel is the one that gives you the confidence to know that you can get from the beginning to the end, and you can tell a complete story. And the second desk drawer novel, you switch to mystery. Is that the novel where you start feeling confident in your writing? Not only can I get from beginning to end, but I can tell a compelling story. And what do you think happened between that second and third novel that eventually became The Lake of Dead Languages?
Well, it's an interesting question, because I often, and people, and I'm glad, but I'll even bring it up myself. Some people will say, like, oh, well, did you ever go back to that second novel and see if you wanted to publish it or try to publish it? And the fact is, I think it's probably not good enough. And I do think there was a difference. There was a change in my writing between that second novel and the third, which became the first published. And part of it was I started writing poetry again. I sort of went back to the beginning. I had moved to Long Island. I took some classes. I started writing poetry. I started taking workshops again, and I moved from poetry into short stories. And what I realized at some point was that I had a writing teacher who praised the language in one of my stories, and yet when I brought in a first chapter of that second unpublished novel, she said, I don't see that language here. So at some point, I had to figure out a way of getting that kind of that language and bringing that into the novel. And I think that was, for me, one of the big differences between the second and the third novel, is that the language itself got a little bit better.
So by the third novel, you had really found your voice as a writer and your type of expression.
Yeah, I think and certainly it's continued to evolve, but sure. I think I did at that point realized that I could do a lot with the language of poetry and the metaphor and visual images in order to create, how to use that to create suspense, atmosphere, and that was, I think, a big difference for me.
You went on to write 5 more literary mysteries after that, nominated for several awards, won the Hammett Prize for literary excellence in crime writing. You also use your books to explore some themes from time to time. Is when you set out to tell a story, what comes to you first? Is it a character? Is it a plot device? Is it a setting? Or do you approach and say, I would like to tell this kind of story. I wonder who the characters might be that would live this out. Where does the germ of the story come from for you?
Well, it can start in many different ways. And I think, often the idea that, sometimes it's just atmosphere. It'll be kind of like, just a certain atmosphere that I want to get at. And I'll start thinking about where would be the story in that. Sometimes it's something that happens and, like an inciting incident will, occur, and I'll think about, what I could do with that. For the novel I wrote, River Road, for instance, there was a tragic hit and run car accident in my neighborhood, and I thought of how horrifying that was for the family of the young girls who were involved, but also it just started making me think about the person who had done that. So that was kind of an inciting incident, but it took me, in order to then write that book, I then had to have all the other pieces, the setting, the atmosphere, the who was this character, who might have hit, been the driver in a hit and run. And so little by little, those pieces started. Once I knew that I wanted to write something about that, I sort of was on the lookout for where all the other pieces were. I realized she was an English professor, and I realized something had happened to her. And so then it started piecing together.
Nice. You've also gone back and written some fantasy, some urban fantasy. What was the draw to pull you back to that early love?
Yeah, because I've always loved that. I mean, I think I read Tolkien when I was, I read The Hobbit when I was like 10. And my older brother, I think I read The Lord of the Rings when I was a teenager. And this is before it became, I mean, it was popular, but not as, crazy as it is now. So I've always loved fantasy. I returned a bit to it when raising my own daughter, that we would read a lot of that together. And so at some point, after having written 6 mysteries, I realized I wanted to, there was something, I was drawn to doing something with urban fantasy. And I also realized I needed a little break from the mystery. I needed, I was just beginning to feel that maybe the mysteries were falling into a pattern, and I wanted to break out of that. So writing urban fantasy, which is something that I enjoyed anyways, was also a way of just sort of clearing the palette and doing something completely different so that I would not fall into a rut, so to speak.
Well, let's talk about the new book, The Night Visitors. This book is absolutely fantastic. And from the cover, and I know that, when you're writing a book, that the cover is the last thing from your imagination most of the time, but the cover really sets a tone for this book. And then, you're writing in the, when you first open, you're in the first person perspective, and you're following along with these characters. Who are these characters, and what is the situation that we find ourselves in as soon as we open the book?
Okay, so we start with a young woman named Alice, and she's on she's traveling on a bus with a young boy, a 10-year-old boy named Oren, and it's winter, it's in the Catskills, snow is coming down. As I'm telling you this, I'm looking out my window and it's snowing. So it's definitely this wintry moment, and we can tell that she's on the run from something. We don't know entirely what yet, and but she's on the run and doesn't know where to go, and she makes a call. She's at a bus stop and sees a advertisement for a hotline, a crisis call center, and she calls there to get shelter for her and Oren. So that's where it starts, and we get there a lot of questions are left for us to wonder, including Oren seemed to have known that she was making the call when he couldn't have heard it. So there's some mystery involved in that. So Alice is who we're with to begin with, and then we switch the next chapter to the woman who is getting called to and told about this woman who's on the road and fleeing some sort of domestic violence situation.
What was the initial idea for this book?
That's the setting. Should I tell you more about Mattie?
Yes, please. That was going to be my next question. Tell us about Mattie, and the story is really interesting in that we have these connected people. Mm-hmm. And tell us about Mattie, and then tell us kind of how the story unfolded for you in the telling.
Okay, so we have this alternating point of view. We've got Alice on the bus going in the Catskills, and then we get to Mattie, who's getting a phone call. She works for the crisis hotline. She gets the call from Mattie's at home, but she gets the call from the person on call to say there's this woman who's she's coming in. Very late on the bus, and she needs to be taken to a domestic violence shelter. They would have said a DB shelter, or say that it's a DV case, domestic violence case. So Mattie is a little older. She's late 50s. She wakes up, gets this call. We sense from her that something a little odd going on with her. She thinks she feels her dog next to her, but when she turns on the light, the dog isn't there. And she goes to answer this, to pick up this young woman, and she's just supposed to pick her up and take her to a shelter. And that's an absolute rule. You don't, in these kind of centers, you don't take the client home. This is something that I learned while doing the training for it. But she picks up this young woman and young boy, Oren, at the, down at the 7-Eleven where the bus drops them off. And it's really cold and it's really snowing. And the boy says, why don't you take us home with you instead? And she hesitates, and he says, it's closer. We might not make it in the storm to the shelter. And so she does it. She gives in. There's something about the boy that's really appealing to her and reminds her of someone. And so against her better judgment, she takes Alice and Oren home with her. And only as she's driving away does she start thinking, how did the boy know that the shelter was further away than my house? So there's a little, eeriness there to that. So that's how those first two chapters set up. So now we know Mattie is doing the thing that she's not supposed to do. She is not supposed to be bringing this woman and child back to her house, and things will go from there.
One thing that I think really makes thrillers work and makes them, get our heart rate up and get us invested in the story is that, most good thrillers are playing on a common fear that we have, or maybe a common experience. And I think we've all had some experience where we've met someone and you have a bit of deja vu or whatever you want to call it, where someone looks familiar, and then the wheels start turning and it gets, and then you start questioning everything. And this book really, nails that, in that there's this kind of common human experience, and then all of the things that we fear could go wrong or start getting complicated. And you really nail that.
Thank you. Yeah, the sense of who do you trust? Why am I drawn to this person? Why am I trusting them? Should I be trusting them? Should I be? And is there, am I doing it for what reasons am I doing it? Is it because they remind me of somebody? Maybe I'm being influenced in some way that is not. Maybe, right. Yeah.
Do you, I'm trying to ask questions without leading into spoiler territory, because, so I'm gonna drop that question for now. But what separates a mystery thriller from one that gets over into supernatural territory, or in you know, how can you allude to things without just going full Stephen King?
Right. That's a really good question, and I'm not sure I know entirely the answer, but there is an element right from the beginning where we think that there might be something going on that's a little bit otherworldly. Because, you know, how did Oren know that? And there was the moment when Mattie thought she felt something against her leg. So I did want to introduce the possibility that there's something in this house. There's a sense of the house that she brings them back to is haunted in some way. But what I really wanted to play with was that sense of haunted as we're all haunted, you know, if you know, bad things have happened to us, and the sense of trauma. So, you know, Alice has clearly experienced some sort of domestic violence trauma. Mattie, something bad happened to her. So I guess I was trying to play with that idea of being haunted by the past, in exploring how trauma affects us, because that's what I was interested in. Yeah, so I wanted to suggest it, and that is an element in it. But I always wanted it to be mostly about the story of these two women and how they're haunted by their pasts and how they come to deal with that. So whether, you know, how real the ghosts become, that's always I want that to be in service to that. So it's not going to be full out Stephen King, although I love Stephen King and I love full out horror. I try to write something when I do introduce that element. I'm trying to make it a little bit more subtle, and hopefully, and yet, you know, there's something in this book. There's definitely something going on, and I think I let the reader know that really pretty much from the beginning.
Well, I love that you allude to those things, but a lot of the stuff you kind of leave off the page or just off the stage, to allow our imagination to start running wild. And while you guide us through that, which is, you know, that's the sign of a great storyteller, when you can say things without saying them, but plant the seeds so that we see them. And, does that make sense?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, you want the reader to just take over at that point, and it's always more effective, the suggested, what the reader is going to imagine in those dark shadows is probably scarier. It'll be their own particular, what they're afraid of. So it's always going to be more powerful if you can summon that up. You know, often the actual, you know, the monster fully lit is often a little disappointing in horror films.
Right.
It's that suggestion, and let the reader fill in the rest.
Yeah, it's the end of every Scooby-Doo cartoon.
Yeah.
What a disappointment. You've written and published a number of books, and you talked about earlier the evolution of your voice and your writing style. What has changed for you in your writing process through the years? Not just, you know, the evolution of your prose, but how you work. Do you are you a writer that has a daily routine? You know, do you enjoy the rigor, or you know, can you just kind of plop down anywhere and write?
Well, I definitely have a routine, and I've always had a routine. The routine has changed over the years, because for a number of years I was a writer who had a young child at home. So, you know, my writing really revolved around getting her to school and then coming home and writing, and usually stopping when she came back. So the routines have changed, but I still really, I like to get up and write from the morning, you know, start in the morning, as I get older, I realize, you know, this is when my brain cells are most likely to work. So it's definitely starting in the morning is always really crucial to me. In terms of, so I start in the morning, I still write by hand. I write, all my first drafts in a composition notebook, and then, you know, type up usually chapter by chapter. There has been, I think, a change. I'm a little bit more directed when I have an idea for a book in terms of what I need to go out and get for it. I think I've become a little bit more aggressive research-wise in terms of going out and finding out what I need to find out. I think I'm a little quicker in seeing, what I want in the book, which doesn't mean each book is still different. And when I start each one, it feels a little bit like I'm, just a beginner again. But there are a few, little tools, I guess, that I can pull out, or I know, or when I'm struggling, I can remember like, oh yeah, you always struggle about 20,000 words. That's the point at which you're like, oh, it's the book tends to feel a little bit less shiny and new and you have some problems. So some of the experiences comes in, but it always feels like I'm learning again how to write a book, which I think it should. It should. Yeah. Beginner mind, as they say in yoga.
Well, you're learning how to write that particular book for sure.
Like, yes, exactly.
Yeah. I'm always fascinated by people that write novels longhand. You said you write them in a composition book. How many composition books will you have by the time you're finished with this, 80, 90, 100,000 word thriller that you're writing?
I'm looking around, and I'm just going to step for a second. I'd say about 5 or 6, maybe. And sometimes it depends on whether I'm writing other things, because I'll just, I number the pages, and I might be working on something else at the same time. So I might, the books that may have other things in them, like the rough draft of a blog I'm writing, or just some other thing. And there in the past, I have actually worked on more than one book at a time, although I do not recommend doing that. But I'm looking up at it like 2 bookshelves full of the old notebooks, and I'd say like 5 or 6 probably from start to finish. But then there'll be a couple I'll look back, and like the genesis of the idea might have been like 4 or 5 notebooks back.
When have you ever attempted to write just strictly from the computer without doing that first draft handwritten?
No.
It works for you.
No, I won't do it. I mean, I have occasionally I'll type up something else, like a blog or something. Even that I prefer to handwrite. I really feel that first of all, I've just done it for so long now that holding the pen in my hand just, I think, does that connection between hand and brain. Sort of triggers the creative process for me, and it gives me a chance to be kind of sloppy and get down a first draft that's not going to be. I know it's not perfect. I know it's it's going to be changed. Plus, I think originally I'm kind of a lazy person, and then if I type it out first, it would be typed, and I wouldn't go back and make the changes that I needed to. Whereas the typing it up, it ensures that I'm doing, that next draft.
Right. Well, whatever you're doing, don't change it, because it's working amazingly for you. The Night Visitors, when everyone is hearing this, is out everywhere. It's in paperback and Kindle for those of you that like to read on e-readers, and I believe it's also an audiobook. Carol, if people are just learning about you and all that you do, is there a place where they can connect with you, maybe dig through your back catalog and find out about some news coming up?
Well, I have a website, carolgoodman.com. I've got a author page on Facebook. So both of those on Twitter at C_Goodmania.
Nice.
One of my daughter's friends gave, when I said, like, how do I pick a Twitter handle? That's what she came up with.
I love it.
That's why we have children to tell us how to use technology. So
that's right.
I am on Twitter, Facebook. I am not on Instagram. I should be. But I've got a website, carolgoodman.com, and all the books are there, and essays and stuff too that I've written.
You really need to be on Instagram. That's where all the happy vibes in writing are.
Yes. Okay. I will try to start that. Actually, I have an Instagram account. I just don't use it.
Gotcha.
I will try.
Well, we'll link up all of that good stuff in the show notes, and we're going to send everybody to pick up their copy of The Night Visitors. Carol, this has been so much fun chatting with you. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Thank you, Hank. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
Once and ago, Hulda said, land full of witches. Witches in the sky, in the trees, witches down the well. Justine, a great witch. Many herbs, many friends. One day, curse fall. Everyone die, everyone who believe in hexe. This 1692. Hidden the knowledge is. The appointed hide it. A great curse cast in Salem that year. Legion, she cast curse to kill the day world. In New Amsterdam they not know, only see. Everyone die. What for? They blame Justine. Chased her off. She come here, I think. Hide from witch hunters. You, her blood. Possibly Hulda was correct. I was a witch, just as she was. She promised my magic would come once I was a woman. I cannot say by what steps I came to believe Hulda's seductive promises of power, but I do know the moment when I chose to be a witch, irrevocably and with my whole heart. On the Sunday that Cornelia Van Cortlandt became Cornelia Beekman, the newly wedded pair made their first public appearance at church, their coming out, as was the custom, so that our poor congregation could thoroughly enjoy the spectacle of her bridal finery. The pair arrived late, with the whole bridal party in wedding array. Cornelia wore fawn-colored silk over a light blue damask petticoat. Gerard wore a waistcoat of the same, and a long coat of white broadcloth. After services, the Beekmans graciously shared the leftovers of their wedding feast, serving chicken and ale to the congregation, outside among the graves of the old burying ground. The day was pleasant, and the grass sweet. The tenant farmers and peasant wives stood all hunched about, licking their fingers and making little bows of deference. Cornelia held a bouquet of orange blossoms to her cheek, and everyone agreed that she was the most beautiful young lady in all creation, married to the most good-natured and remarkable man. "That will be you some day," my mother whispered. The sun kissed Gerard's forehead as he reached into his purse and showered the graveyard with coins. All my neighbors fell to their knees at the couple's feet, scrabbling for pennies. Only I remained unbent. I stood, staring daggers into Cornelia, as she accepted a surreptitious kiss from her beautiful husband. Oh, that kiss in the graveyard. A perfect kiss of love and devotion and tribute. She noticed my expression of pain and mistook it for disappointment. "Did you not get a penny, dear?" she said, smiling. "Here you go." She threw her bouquet of orange blossoms to me. I caught it and gave her a tiny bow. Yes, I thought, that would be me some day. I crushed the bouquet to my heart and swore my oath. Cornelia would not win. She was no better than I. I was special, too. I wore no emeralds. I wore no silk, but I trailed fireflies. I deserved such a perfect kiss. I deserved such a perfect man. And if I could not win a god by grace, I would seize one by sorcery.